I want to start with the Haystack Monument. And this would be up in the northwest corner of Massachusetts. The town is Williamstown, Massachusetts. If you ever visit there, right on Route 2 will take you right through the campus of Williams College, and you'll see a beautiful white congregational church. And you have to go to there's a circle then, and take the road north, and then you can find a road to turn in and get you behind that white congregational church, and you will find then a round drive, and in the center of that drive is this monument, okay? And also near that is on down the hill is a cemetery where there are the graves of these early leaders that were involved in the Second Great Awakening, and people like Mark Hopkins, that was a later president, and actually was president at the 50th anniversary of the Haystack Monument, and his brother Albert Hopkins. These were great. They're not Baptists, but they were great evangelical Christians. Okay. But this is a big monument. Okay, that I know it's taller than that may be 10 or 12 feet high. This sphere on top of here representing the world is a big sphere. And then this has a haystack here in the center of this is what that is. All right, so I want to start with this because this introduces the time and gets us to Luther Rice. I'm just going to do part of this. Williams College began its academy in 1791. The impetus for starting the school came from the estate of Colonel Ephraim Williams. Colonel Ephraim Williams died in the French and Indian War defending New England in a battle near Crown Point in 1755. Seth Pomeroy of Northampton served as Lieutenant Colonel in Williams' regiment. Ephraim Jr. was the son of Ephraim Sr., who was the younger brother of William Williams of Hatfield. William was married to Christian Stoddard, sister of Jonathan Edwards' mother, Esther Stoddard Edwards. And so this is all connected with the Great Awakening and these older people, connected with Great Awakening, Jonathan Edwards' family. Solomon Stoddard was the patriarch of all this bunch. So on. The trustees of the new academy were petitioned the legislature to become a college. The petition was granted June 1793. First students in October 1793. This was a time of trouble in the American culture. The powerful forces of English deism and French infidelity turned many away from biblical Christianity, like Thomas Paine, okay, we were talking about earlier. Marshall and Manuel, if you're familiar with The Light and the Glory and From Sea to Shining Sea and so forth, Marshall and Manuel described the impact of the French Revolution and deism. Their version of republicanism, a heady brew, flattered man into believing that his own intellect reigned supreme. Its proponents made it a new secular religion, and its evangelists, among them American heroes like Tom Paine, brought their faith to our shores with missionary zeal. Deism emphatically rejected the triune God of Scriptures. It renounced the divinity of Jesus Christ, his sacrifice on the cross to atone for the sins of men, and his resurrection. Indeed, according to the deists, there was nothing to atone for. To them, the concept of man's nature as sinful and fallen was repugnant and absurd. Many respected American thinkers and statesmen agreed with them. Ironically, those most susceptible to this enlightenment were young men at colleges, originally founded to provide future American ministers of education at home so that they would not have to sail to England to attend Oxford or Cambridge. Here, the new rationalism spawned like bacteria in warm milk, for it seduced the intellect through flattery, and the intellects of these teenage students did not have the benefit of the balance and discernment that comes with a lifetime of seasoned faith. Williams College was infected. Here is an eyewitness testimony. I entered Williams College, says the writer, the year it was incorporated. It was the time of the French Revolution, which was at that time very popular with almost all the members of the college and with almost all people in that part of the country. French liberty and French philosophy poured in upon us like a deluge. and seemed to sweep almost everything serious before it. The spirit of ridicule and abuse ran so high that no one dared manifest seriousness, only those whom God had truly made serious. Albert Hopkins recounted the marvels of the grace of God that confronted this spiritual darkness, commencing in Litchfield County, that's Connecticut, and adjoining portions of this state, under the administrations of the vice president of this college now present. The work spread rapidly in the western portion of New England, was carried southward by Alexander, afterward the venerable Dr. Alexander of Princeton, that's Archibald Alexander, and others, and west and northward in New York and the new settlements of Vermont. By the way, Timothy Dwight, the grandson of Edwards, was involved with that as well. Some of those involved in the Second Great Awakening were Dr. Edward Dorr Griffin, third president of Williams College. He was pastor of the Congregational Church in New Hartford, Connecticut. I just drove by that church. When my wife and I come to New England, we get off the big highways and we take all these back roads and so forth. And so we drove past New Hartford. We went through Litchfield. We went through Torrington, where Samuel J. Mills was born, and so forth. And as I do that, and of course getting ready for this, my mind just, going by all that to remember that history and what happened in these places here, Dr. Griffin remembered the blessings of revival had spread to his church from the ministry of Reverend Jeremiah Halleck of West Simsbury, Connecticut. I was in Simsbury too. Reverend Halleck testified that God had used T.M. Cooley of Granville, Massachusetts, in their church. Others involved were Reverend Samuel John Mills Sr. of Torringford, Connecticut. That's the father of Samuel Mills Jr. And Reverend Robbins of Norfolk, Connecticut. Young men converted in these churches came to Williams to study. The leading students in this revival were Mills, that's the son of this Reverend Mills here, Gillette, Robbins, Halleck, Hyde, and others should have had their attention directed to this institution, remote and difficult of access to most of them, an institution then in its infancy, offering very moderate facilities to those who resorted to it, is a fact which we can only refer to the sovereign ordering of God. Certain it is that had their minds been otherwise directed, our Jubilee would not have been held. In the spring of 1801, says Griffin, the college received an important change from the accession of the freshman class of 4 young men from the revivals in Litchfield County, Connecticut. In this way, the influence of the new era gradually crept upon the college, which from that time began to rise up in the sacred distinction of being the birthplace of American missions. Though enthusiasm for the sentiments and theories of the French Revolution may have cooled perceptibly with the opening of the new century, the non-religious tone persisted until a revival beginning in 1805 and continuing intermittently for a considerable period changed the atmosphere and introduced a new era. Some of the students began meeting regularly for prayer meetings. One particular day in July or August of 1806, the group included Samuel J. Mills Jr. He was older, by the way. He was an older student. And James Richards, Francis Robin, Harvey Loomis, and Byron Green. It was a hot day. They sought out a maple grove in a field known as Sloan's Meadow. We first went to the grove, expecting to hold our prayer meeting there, but a dark cloud was rising in the west, and it soon began to thunder and lightning. And we left the grove and went under the haystack to protect us from the approaching storm, which was soon realized. The subject of conversation under the stack before and during the shower was the moral darkness of Asia. Mills proposed to send the gospel to that dark and heathen land, and said that we could do it if we would. We were all agreed and delighted with the idea except Loomis. Come, says Mills, let us make it a subject of prayer under this haystack while the dark clouds are going and the clear sky is coming. We all prayed and made foreign missions a subject of our prayers except Loomis. Mills made the last prayer and was in some degree enthusiastic. And by the way, this Mills went on to he helped start the American Colonization Society, which was sending slaves back to Africa, and they planted churches and so forth in what became Liberia and so forth. And he actually died on a sea voyage going back and forth to Africa. But he also had went and taken scripture portions, traveled out west in the new American territories, and was spreading the gospel that way. You know, a number of things. He was very, and for starting that American Colonization Society, the legal papers were drawn up by Francis Scott Key. Okay, and he got all these members of Congress involved in these different missionary projects and so forth. So this Mills is very influential and important person as well. He was never a Baptist, but he definitely was a gospel preacher. There's no doubt about that. Okay. And the prayer meetings continued outdoors until the cold weather, when Mrs. Bardwell opened her home to the prayer group. The following is a list of names that usually attended: John Nelson, Calvin Bushnell, Byram Green, Rufus Pomeroy, Francis Robbins, Samuel Ware, Edwin Dwight, Ezra Fisk, Harvey Loomis, Samuel J. Mills, and James Richards. Others attended occasionally. When Samuel J. Mills graduated and continued his studies at Andover Theological Seminary, Andover, Massachusetts, he took with him his passion for world missions. Again, he organized Brethren for Prayer to petition church leaders to send them as missionaries. This resulted in the formation of the American Board of Foreign Commissioners. The Haystack Prayer Meeting came to fruition when Adoniram and Ann Judson, Samuel and Harriet Newell sailed from Salem, Massachusetts, and Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Knott, Gordon Hull, and Luther Rice sailed from Philadelphia in February of 1812. And we'll stop with that, right? You can read the rest of that, but we'll stop with that for right now to introduce us, because Luther Rice was not at the Haystack Prayer Meeting, but he eventually joined the Brethren. When he came to school there, these others were upperclassmen. He got involved, and then they went out to Andover, I should be saying. He followed in Andover. He never finished his course in Andover. He didn't graduate from Andover, but he got all involved in the missions work, and was one of the ones that petitioned in the Congregationalists to send the missionaries and so forth. So this is all the background of things that led up to the sending of these missionaries and the times in which they lived. And when we think of the paganism we live in today, just people start praying and believe God. We can still do great things in spite of. They had a bad atmosphere too. They had a bad environment. Okay. But that doesn't have any limit on the power of God, Just pray and believe God and follow His leading, in our own day. This is what we need to do. So he was born in Worcester County in 1783, raised in the Congregational Church, attended public schools, noted for his self-reliant youth. At 16, he traveled to Georgia to obtain lumber for shipbuilding. He's already some kind of a businessman. Okay. After this, he entered a great period of great concern for his soul. In 1802, he joined the Northborough Church. He was consistent and active Christian worker, striving for holiness in his own life and others, interested in missions and reading missionary periodicals. I don't know the details about his conversion, but he was converted at this point. He worked on his father's farm, wanted to pursue college and theological education. He attended the Leicester Academy, and for 3 years supported himself by teaching during vacations and giving singing lessons at night. And then we talk about the Haystack Prayer Meeting in 1806. A number of students were awakened to salvation in the Great Awakening in Western Connecticut and Western Massachusetts. Entered Williams College. They met regularly for prayer. One day they sought shelter in the haystack. We've been talking about that, and this is the ones that were there for that day. And this prayer group became known as the Brethren. Okay, the Brethren. Okay, And so then Rice enters William College. He made friends with the brethren and joined their prayer meetings. And Samuel J. Mills and others went on to Andover Theological Seminary, where the brethren expanded with Adoniram and others. And Judson also attended Andover, joined them later. But in 1810, Judson, Knott, Mills, Newell, Richards, and Rice petitioned the Congregational Churches of Massachusetts, meeting in Bradford, to engage in missions to the heathen and to appoint them as missionary. And he wrote in his diary, "I have deliberately made up my mind to preach the gospel to the heathen," 1811. And so then was the founding of this American Board of Foreign Commissioners. Their mission board preceded the Baptists. And but Richards and Rice were omitted. However, Rice appealed to the board, and the commissioners would authorize him to, if he could raise his own outfit and passage. We don't have money for him. And he accomplished this in a few days. This guy was motivated, let me tell you. And so he went out and preached in churches, and he raised the funds. And then they were all ordained at the Tabernacle Church in Salem, Massachusetts. And again, I earlier showed I won't dig it out right now, but the picture there in the Immortal Seven by a man by the name of Hill, there's the picture, depiction of them at the ordination. He was part of that ordination. February 18th, 1812, Luther, Rice, Gordon Hall, and Samuel Knott and his wife sailed from Philadelphia on the Harmony, and the others had sailed on the Caravan from Salem, and they were on separate ships so as not to lose all the missionaries in one shipwreck. The Judsons and Luther Rice became Baptists through their Bible studies during the voyage, and so they knew they were going to meet William Carey. And see, these students had, when they're talking about missions in Asia, that all affected by the news that had come from William Carey and the Calvinists over there in the particular Baptists that started sending out missionaries in England, and this aroused people in America, and these young students started thinking about it. Yes?
Question. Rice had to raise his own money for the voyage.
Yeah.
Did Judson also, or did he become a Baptist well supported by the congregation?
Yes, he became a Baptist well supported by the Congregationalists.
Gotcha.
Okay. And even Rice raised his own funds, but he still was authorized.
Yes.
He was under a commission from the Congregationalists.
Right.
So the moment they got on shore over there and they got baptized by William Carey or William Ward, whichever one baptized, they weren't baptized by the same, they didn't get there at the same time, and they weren't baptized together. But at any rate, then they knew they had a problem, and in all honesty, they had to fess up to the Congregationalists that they were going to operate as Baptists now, and so they had to let them know and sever connections that they didn't expect the Congregationalists to support them as Baptist missionaries. So this became the problem. So November 1st, 1812, Luther Rice was immersed by William Ward. He was the printer, but he was a great preacher and a missionary in every respect over there, one of the partners with William Carey. He, like the Judsons, contemplated contact with William Carey and the associates in India. The study of scriptures convinced him, independently of the Judson, of the proper subjects and mode of baptism. It is believer's baptism by immersion. A proper subject of baptism is a believer, and the proper mode is immersion. And the Judsons were immersed by William Carey shortly before. They arrived. Their ship had arrived before. Because of the policy of the East India Company, again, this is the Brit merchants, the missionaries had to leave India. They didn't want them causing trouble with the religions of India and hurting business. Judsons would leave for Burma, and Luther Rice would go to the Isle of France and then back to the United States to resign from the American board. Since he was single, they thought it'd be easier for him to travel back, and he would do that. And so, but the point was, he was going to go back and resign and then try to get the Baptists to support them. Then he was supposed to come and back and work as a missionary in India. Okay, it didn't work out that way. Okay, the study of the, let's see, where am I? Luther Rice would then introduce the new missionaries to the Baptists and seek their blessing and their support. Luther Rice had no idea that this would become his life works. Adoniram Judson would never forgive him for not returning to help him.
Is that tongue in cheek?
Yeah, sort of tongue in cheek. Yeah,
Never's a long time.
yeah. But at any rate, he started in Boston. I don't think I. Oh yes, I have this here. He leaves for America in 1813. There, September he arrived in New York and immediately set out for Boston. And he was not well received by the Congregationalists, who rudely severed their relations. Baptists in Boston appointed Rice as agent to visit all parts of the country for the cause of spreading the gospel to the heathen. The Baptists in Massachusetts had already organized a local missionary society, to help even the English, and so forth. They hadn't really started sending missionaries and so forth, but they and they were powerful. I mean, they had churches and they were growing, and so.
Was that Stoughton's group?
What's that?
Was that Stoughton's group?
No, Stoughton would have been in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia.
Okay, this would be, I can't think of all the Baptists. Baldwin would have been one of them there. I can't think of all of them that were there in Boston at that time. But, so then that resulted, Baptists in Boston appointed him to visit all parts of the country for the cause of spreading the gospel to the heathen. This resulted then in organizing the Triennial Convention, which the General Convention of the Baptist denomination in the United States for Foreign Mission was organized in Philadelphia. That's where William Stoughton was, and the Baptist churches were powerful there and in Pennsylvania. They had a bunch of churches. The Pennsylvania Association, as I mentioned, that's the oldest Baptist association in America and very influential as well. And they followed their doctrinal statement is the Second London Confession, with a few additions and so forth. So that's where they organized a general convention for the whole nation. So then Rice went on preaching tours, collected money for the cause, made arrangements for future contribution, organized missionary societies. Dr. Cummins says, by horseback, Rice traveled thousands of miles a year, preaching and representing missions. He had no home, no wardrobe, but what he could carry, and no bank account. He started out with public conveyance like stagecoach. He also rode horseback, exceeding John Wesley's record of 93 miles in one day by 3. He used a one-horse sulky, and I think that's a carriage that much like doctors would go around on their rounds. It gave them a little protection, but it's almost like one of these things, that you see on tractors and stuff. Guys are out plowing, they got a little thing. That's all it is like 2 wheels, that come back, and it's just got a little thing to cover you over to protect you from the elements and so forth. And it's not a carriage. It's nothing like the Amish have, or something like that. This is a one-horse sulky. He swam rivers, braved blizzards, endured heat, was in jeopardy of wild Indians and bandits, lodged under the open sky. When he did find lodging in a home, whether in a crude log cabin or a fine mansion, he would read the Bible, sing a hymn, pray, and usually give a testimony concerning missions. In 1815, Rice, traveling in New York, impressed on John Mason Peck the missionary cause. Peck went to study with Stoughton in Philadelphia. He was appointed for service in the Missouri Territory. And then Peck and Jonathan Going of Worcester, Mass. So he was a leader in the Massachusetts a little bit later. They would lead the delegates in New York to form the American Baptist Home Mission Society. So there's the connection here with Rice, both with the Home Mission Society and the Foreign Mission Society through his influence on Peck, and probably influenced Jonathan Going too. I don't know all about that. In 1817, Rice reported he had traveled 7,800 miles that year and collected $3,700 and stirred interest in missions everywhere. He advocated for expanding in home missions, education, and publications. He wanted the national capital to be the base of denominational operation. Peck and James Welch were commissioned to go to the Missouri Territory. Rice promoted a great goal to improve education for pastors and missionaries. the convention voted to proceed with classical and theological seminary from funds separate from the mission funds. They adopted Stoughton's School in Philadelphia as the theological seminary. Rice was the treasurer and the agent. Thus, he was carrying the burden for missions and for education. And later on, he got in trouble, actually, because he was borrowing funds from one fund to meet needs in another. And he had every intention not to do anything illegal and something. He felt that the money was going to come in, he'd be able to repay those funds and so forth. But later on, when people evaluated this, that this is not the way we want things done. So eventually, after a number of years, 1826, they took everything out of Rice's hands. But when they studied this over, Rice had not done anything criminal. It wasn't that he was pilfering the money, or there wasn't anything like that. It was a man just wanted to do everything, and the funds weren't there to do everything that he wanted to do as fast as he wanted to do it. That's what it was all about. 1818, the Triennial Convention found the Latter-day Luminary in Washington, and I have the first edition of that, leather-bound. I tried to find it to bring with me because I thought I'd read some things out of there. I don't know where it is right now, but at any rate, I have it anyway, that has all the individual editions bound together in a leather copy from whatever year. It's the first edition, whatever year it is. The convention purchased 46.5 acres adjoining Washington, D.C. A building was erected to accommodate 80 students. Pastor William Stoughton moved to Washington to be the president of Columbia College, and Ira Chase the professor. And so they had to borrow money to build that building. The Triennial Convention voted to close the Western Mission in order to concentrate on foreign missions. So they left Peck stuck, okay? And they told Peck that he should go someplace else. Peck said, "I'm doing what God wants," and he stayed put. And then he appealed to the Massachusetts Baptist Missionary Society that I talked about, and so they began to give him $5 a month. $5 a month. And but he was publishing and different other things, so he and his family went through all kind of privations and stuff, but he stuck it out all of his life. At any rate, the seminary opened in 1821, and Rice founded the Columbian Star, another paper, and because I think the convention was winding down the Latter-day Luminary, because again they wanted to just concentrate on foreign missions, and they thought all these other projects were hurting the foreign missions cause. So they said, if these other things should be, let them have their own organizations and raise funds separately and so forth. But they were embarrassed over the problems of Columbia College and the financial situation. So his labors were exhausting. Difficulties arose to meet the financial obligations. The college built another building on more borrowed money. Rice's health broke down. 1823, the Triennial Convention voted to sever ties with the Columbian College. They were determined to separate the foreign missionary operation from the educational institution. In 1824, there was the organization of the Baptist General Tract Society in Washington, D.C. Again, Luther Rice was the treasurer. In 1840, this became the American Baptist Publication Society, which continues today under the American Baptist Churches and so forth. But they did a tremendous work for many years. A lot of great stuff was published and so forth. 1826, the Triennial Convention voted to drop all enterprises except foreign missions. They were embarrassed by the debt that had been incurred at the college. They had a committee to investigate the services of Luther Rice. He was not guilty of dishonesty, but they found his accounts to be poorly managed. He expanded operations beyond the direct intent of the convention and without sufficient funds. Other agents were appointed for the convention activities, but Luther Rice, without official capacity, was permitted to continue to raise funds for the college while continuing to labor for the missionary cause, visiting churches and missionary societies. He was allowed to collect the funds, but others disperse the funds, okay? He was a man of great ability and of great vision for Baptist causes. He accumulated nothing for himself. He had to All he had to leave to the college when he died was his horse and his sulky. He had nothing else. When he was in Washington back home, he must have boarded with somebody, and so forth. He had nothing, And he, by the way, he had asked the women to marry. I think he was actually had proposed to somebody back when he first went as a missionary to India, but the person he proposed to, when they found out he was going to India, they broke the engagement. And along the way, he had proposed to some others, but because of the life he lived in this dedication to the missionary cause and to the Columbian College and all this traveling, so nobody would ever marry him. And so he lived alone all of his life, but he was well loved. There were places along the way in all these journeys, north or south, east or west, wherever it was, he made friends with people, and if he was in the area, their attitude was, you come and stay with us. He was that loved and respected, and must have been a tremendous friend and spiritual, godly man. And even Mrs. Stoughton that I talked to, was talking about this. When she died, they asked her about various ones and what she wanted to say. She treated Luther Rice like he was part of the family, and she, on her dying deathbed, had these words of blessing for Luther Rice and love for him as a friend of their family and all this, Luther gave his life to build the missionary base for worldwide missions in Baptist churches and to provide education to prepare young men to serve and to spread Baptist churches. September the 25th, 1836, while touring South Carolina, he died at the home of a friend, Dr. Mays. This is one of these homes. And he's buried at the Pleasant Point Baptist Church, Edgefield District, South Carolina. And this is from his monument. Luther Rice was a portly person and a commanding presence, combined a strong and brilliant intellect. As a theologian, he was orthodox. In other words, he's a Calvinist. A scholar, his education was liberal. And that doesn't mean liberal in the sense that we have today. I mean, that he had a broad education. Okay. He was an eloquent and a powerful preacher. A self-denying and indefatigable philanthropist. Self-denying is for sure. His frailties with his dust are entombed. In other words, we're going to forget about whatever criticisms there were of him. Upon the walls of Zion, his virtues are engraven. By order of the Baptist Convention of the state of South Carolina, this monument is erected to his memory. In other words, he was highly esteemed. Even though he'd had these problems, and some failures, the overall judgment was, this was a great man of God. You see. Perhaps no American, this is what the South Carolina Baptists wanted to say, perhaps no American has done more for the great missionary enterprise. It is thought the first American foreign mission on which he went to India, associated with Judson and others, originated with him. And if the Burmans have cause of gratitude towards Judson for a faithful version of God's word, so they will through generations to come rise up and call Rice blessed. For it was his eloquent appeals for the heathen on his return to America which raised our Baptist churches to adopt the Burman mission and sustain Judson in his arduous toils. No Baptist has done more for the cause of education. He founded the Columbian College in the District of Columbia, which he benevolently intended by its central position to diffuse knowledge, both literary and religious, through these United States. And if for one of deserved patronage, that unfortunate institution, which was the special subject of his prayers and toils for the last 15 years of his life, failed to fulfill the high purpose of its founder, yet the spirit of education awakened by his labors shall accomplish this noble aim. And now I depend a lot on William Cathcart, his Baptist Encyclopedia, which you can find online, okay? And you can download entries that they have on great people in the past. As a preacher, Mr. Rice was rarely excelled. He was dignified in appearance and unusually attractive in his style. His sermons were characteristically doctrinal and weighty in fundamental truths. He was eminently gifted also in prayer. He wrote a work on baptism, which, however, was not published. He was elected, and there's a job for you, Kevin. Find that book on baptism and publish it. Okay. He was elected in 1850 to the presidency of the Transylvania University of Lexington, Kentucky, and also that of the Georgetown, Kentucky. Maybe they wanted him after Stoughton died. Both of which he declined, as the two great objects of his life, missions and ministerial education, absorbed all the energies of his soul and body. Luther Rice returned to America to stir the Baptists to take up the cause of missions tirelessly until his death in 1836. He remained Judson's partner half a world away. And so, even though he never came back to Judson, he never left his commitment to what he and Judson set out to do. We've got just a minute left here. Turn back to the thing about the haystack prayer meeting, and I want to. One of the people that Judson and Rice knew was a man by the name of Gordon. Let me see here, just a second here. Yeah, Gordon Hall. Gordon Hall. And Gordon Hall Jr. had been in the Brethren both in Williams College and Andover. And he continued as a congregational minister in India, and he died over there. And his wife and this boy, Gordon Hall Jr., came back to America. And in the providence of God, Gordon Hall Jr. became the pastor of the Edwards Church of Northampton. And this was the mid 19th century. So he was there in Northampton at the 50th anniversary of the Haystack Prayer Meeting in 1856. He was an evangelical. I lived in Northampton for 30 years. I can tell you that that Edwards Church, which is not the church where Edwards preached, but that church where Edwards had preached, which is called First Churches, grew so large that a part of the congregation built another building, and they called it the Edwards Church. It's just down the street, and it continues. And today it's an A-frame building, but both the First Churches and Edwards Church are both the most liberal places. I mean, the gospel has no part there. The whole Rainbow Coalition and all that stuff is, all this woke, they're progressive Christians, okay? I'd say progressive religionists, okay? They're not Christians, and so forth. It's just a sad thing. But this Gordon Hall was there, and he was a gospel preacher. And so he spoke at the 50th anniversary up at the monument, and he said, this is at the bottom of that second page I have on the place section. Gordon Hall, alumnus of Williams, died in India, but his son was brought back to America. Gordon Hall Jr. is buried at Northampton in the Bridge Street Cemetery, where David Brainerd is buried. And there's a plaque on his obelisk in memory of his father, too. Gordon Hall Jr., as pastor of the Edward Church in Northampton, addressed the Missionary Jubilee in 1856. He predicted the relationship of those who preached the gospel to Mission Park at Williams College. This is significant of why that Haystack Prayer Meeting monument still is important to us today. This is what he said in 1856. It may well be supposed that I am interested in the movement which is making to purchase the meadow where Mills and his associates prayed, and to preserve it as consecrated ground. See, they built the monument after this, okay? If Bunker Hill deserves its monument as one of the opening scenes of the Revolutionary conflict, then this spot should be marked whether is traced an organization destined to revolutionize nations. If the Turk and the Russian will contend for their holy places, then we should vie with each other in our love and reverence for this hallowed spot. This is one of earth's holy places. From here has gone forth a power greater than any battlefield or council chamber. Let these acres be the possession of Williams College, whose sons have consecrated them. Let them be enclosed and held sacred, and let some fitting monument set forth that which gives them glory. Let the students of this institution in coming years tread these grounds to breathe a hallowed atmosphere, to be sensible of the high communings of heavenly sympathies. Nay, pardon me, trustees of this college and gentlemen of the faculty and honored alumni, pardon me when I say that this is not your property, not yours wholly. It never can be. Every missionary, every lover of missions will claim that they have property here, that this is Christ's ground, that they are joint heirs with Christ. The graduate of Yale and of Amherst shall tread these grounds and claim they have property here. The Christian scholar from our Eastern or Western institutions and many from the old world shall tread these grounds and claim that they have property here. The Christian student shall lay open his heart to the associations of this place and go hence a holier and stronger man. And the weary missionary, revisiting his native land, after meditating here, shall go away refreshed and strengthened. Here doubtless will a missionary spirit be breathed into many a heart, and upon many a heart will a new baptism of the Spirit be poured out here. And this seat of learning, why should it be among her sons that this immense and growing evangelical enterprise took its rise? Because here God gave His unction from on high. To God then we commend this ground, that it may ever yield a harvest of sanctifying memories and quickening impulses. To God we commend this honored and beloved institution, that it may raise up a long succession of able and faithful men to preach the unsearchable riches of Christ, which we've been talking about this morning. So that tells you where Gordon Hall stood as the pastor of the Edwards Church in Northampton at that time. And they've forsaken it. And of course, Williams College has forsaken it as well. I was there when they had the 200th anniversary, and the things that were said at the college about these young men and so forth at that time was kind of pathetic. I wrote back to the paper up there, and I corresponded with the dean and I think the president as well and so forth, and I wrote up things and sent it to them because they were a little ignorant is what it boiled down to. They really need to understand the import of what the Haystack Monument meant. And so I've either taken people to the monument or I've directed them to the monument in my years there at Northampton, of people looking for things of real significance to do. And so I encourage you, people should not forget the Haystack Monument and what it meant then to Luther Rice, Adnarm Judson, and all of this work of missions. Lord bless you.
Good.